and in this lesson, we're going to go over how to build your own anatomically correct wire armatures for sculpture. As for materials, we'll only be using some 14 gauge aluminum wire, some pliers with wire cutters, and a ruler. That's it. You might wonder, what's the purpose of an armature? Well, you don't want your sculptures to look like they were made by little kids. You want to make sure they are mature. Sculpture pun. No. The armature is the support. It's the structure. It's the skeleton. It's what keeps our sculptures from slumping over like limp, spineless noodles. The armature is one of the most important parts of the sculpture. It not only serves as support, but it also serves as an internal measuring system that makes sure that all of the proportions are already in place before we ever begin adding clay. Think of the armature as the foundation and the frame of the house. If we don't have those correct, then there will be some serious problems later on. So let's make sure that we get the armature right from the beginning. If we do it right, then we'll have all of those proportions that we all struggle with neatly in place, and we're on our way to making an anatomically correct sculpture. An important construction principle that applies to sculpture is that if you take your time to accurately fulfill each stage of the process before moving to the next stage, you'll save yourself a lot of time later on. You won't have to redo parts of the process if you get them right from the beginning. In drawing, the first step is usually lightly capturing the gesture, proportions, and composition of the figure on the page. When sculpting, the armature is the foundation upon which the sculpture is built. I've studied many methods for building wire armatures for sculpture. It's simple, it's quick, it doesn't require a lot of supplies, there's no extra wire that you need to cut off at the end, and it's easy to remember once you've practiced it a few times. Now, there's a lot of cool tricks and tips to improve the armature that we will go over in the premium course, but in this video, the most important thing is to be able to build a simple wire skeleton for your sculpture. If we build this armature correctly, we'll only need to cut the wire once, and we won't need tape, glue, string, or fairy dust to keep it all together once we're finished. Robert Beverly Hale's cranial units align with the bony landmarks of the body. This means they are more consistent from person to person. I understand that this measuring system will be an adjustment for some of you, but it's worth learning. Cranial units, making the average figure 11.5 cranial units tall. It is more important to understand these proportions when you're sculpting than when you're drawing. This is because when we're drawing in 2D, foreshortening will almost always shorten some measurements of the body. When we're sculpting, we don't have to worry about this. Okay, let's make the armature. For this method, we will start at the top of the head, move down the neck and over to the right arm of the sculpture, back up to the pit of the neck, then down the spine and over to the right leg of the sculpture, then back up to the bottom of the spine and continue over to the left leg, then back up the spine and over to the left arm and finish up at the head. As you unwind the wire, be sure to roll it out as opposed to pulling the wire out of the spool. Pulling it will cause it to bunch up and make a mess of your wire. For this armature, our cranial unit will be 1 inch, which will make our armature about 11.5 inches tall. We will start at the top of the head, move down 2 cranial units to the suprasternal notch, then bend the wire 90 degrees outwards toward the shoulder. When bending the wire, we may need to pinch the wire with the pliers as we bend in order to make a sharp angle. We can also use our thumbnail to press against the wire as we bend it. If the angle is not sharp enough, it will be difficult to know exactly where the joint is, and this could mess up the next measurement. The clavicle is 1 cranial unit, so let's measure out 1 unit to the shoulder joint. After measuring and making the joint for each section of the body, take time to remeasure and make sure that the length didn't change as you bend the wire. This is especially important for your first few armatures. Bend the wire 90 degrees downward to create the upper arm. As we make this armature, let's try to keep in mind which side is the front of the body. We travel down from the shoulder joint 2 units and make a slight bend forward for the elbow. Another 2 units down and we are at the knuckles where the fingers begin. Here we will make a loop that ends at the 2 unit mark, and then retrace our steps back up to the sternum. We can do this by holding the end of the loop between the thumb and forefinger and twisting while feeding the wire with the thumb and forefinger of our other hand. By wrapping the wire around the first section of wire, we avoid shortening the measurements we've already made. If we twisted the wires together, we risk changing those previous measurements. When wrapping the wire back up the armature, try to wrap it as tightly as possible. As we bend and pose the armature, it will usually loosen up, so let's make sure it's wrapped tightly. This is especially important near the joints. Once we get back to the joint of the neck, we twist it tightly and head down the spine. The next bend will be at the bottom of the sacrum, at the same level as the greater trochanter. The distance is technically 3.5 units down from the shoulders. Sometimes I like to go down 4 units so that I can add the curve of the spine to the armature. Adding this curve tends to shorten the spine back to 3.5 units. But if you want to make sure that the spine isn't too long, just go for those 3.5 units. Then we bend the wire 90 degrees out to the greater trochanter, which is 1 unit out from the middle of the spine.
Hey, it's older and wiser and more bearded Andrew from the future. One thing that I realized when students were making their armatures is that the hips often became too wide because they wanted to get that one cranial unit out from the spine to the leg. So I recommend going a half unit or maybe 2/3 of a unit to keep the hips thin. It's really easy to add that thickness that we need with clay in the hip area, but if the armature is too wide in the hips, then that armature is going to get in the way. And so instead of a full unit, I recommend just doing a half unit or 2/3 of a unit when you're going out for the pelvis and then down to the leg.
Make another 90-degree joint to move down the femur to the knee. The femur is 3 cranial units. Bend the knee back slightly, as we did for the forearm, at about a 45-degree angle. Then 3 more units down to the bottom of the foot. Bend the wire towards the back of the foot and make a loop that is about 1/3 of 1 unit long. This will represent the bone at the heel of your foot, called the calcaneus. This will help us remember that the foot extends back behind the ankle as well as in front. Next, run the wire to the front of the foot, which is 1 cranial unit from the ankle joint to the tips of the toes. Make a U-turn and bring the wire back and wrap it tightly around the ankle. Then twist the wire back up to the bottom of the spine and make sure that the wire is wrapped extra tight. Continue the wire over to the other leg and then repeat the measurements for the first leg. And 1 unit from the ankle to the toes, wrap around the ankle and back up to the bottom of the spine. Now you can wrap the wire around the spine all the way back up to the sternum. Wrap the wire once tightly around the neck and then out to the missing arm. 1 unit to the shoulder, bend 90 degrees, 2 units down to the elbow, bend 45 degrees, 2 units down to the beginning of the fingers, make a loop, and back up. Then twist the wire around at the top of the head, and there you have it. The more you practice, the faster you will get at building armatures. To summarize, it's 2 units from the head to the neck, over 1 unit to the shoulder, 2 units to the elbow, 2 more units to the knuckles, and back up to the pit of the neck, 3.5 units down the spine, 1 unit over to the hips, 3 units down to the knee, 3 more units down to the bottom of the foot. The back of the foot is 1/3 of a unit, and the front is 1 unit. Then back up and over to the other leg. 1, 3, 3, 1, and back up to the bottom of the spine. Then over to the other arm. 1, 2, 2, and back up to the head, and you're done. And if you ever forget, you can just come back and look at this image measured out in cranial units. Something to keep in mind is that we don't want the shoulders or the hips to be too wide. Remember that we will be adding clay, so it's better for the shoulders and the hips to be a little too narrow because we'll be adding clay to those areas and we don't want to run into the wire armature later on. So if you err on the side of tall and thin. By changing the size of the cranial unit we start with, we can make the armature any size we want. This armature is about 1/6 life-size scale, but if we were to use thicker wire, we could easily use this same method to go up to 1/2 life size, which would be about 35 inches tall. You can also make small armatures using thin 20-gauge wire. I've made armatures as small as 3 inches tall. These smaller armatures work great for gesture studies. Assignment. Your assignment is to do 3 wire armatures and check your proportions to make sure that you've done it right. We will be using these armatures to study gesture throughout the course. For these armatures, we're going to be using them without a stand, so I recommend 4 to 12 inches tall. There are affiliate links below on where you can purchase wire, or you can just search Amazon or eBay for 14 gauge soft aluminum wire. In the premium course, we will go over many variations so that you can modify your armatures to better fit your needs. There will also be additional demos, critiques, and more, so go check that out. If you found this video helpful, please share it with your friends so that you can all build armatures together. You can have an armature building party. I think that would be fun. I think, you know, some chips and dip and aluminum wire and just spend the day building armatures. Sounds like a good time to me. If you found this video helpful, please share it with your friends, and I'll see you in the next lesson.